Thank you, Carol. I really appreciated the updating there of the pronouns as well. It's helpful to speak a little more modern English than probably when the song was written. I want to talk to you today about one of the pillars of Adventism. We call it the three angels' messages. Now, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear that phrase, the three angels' messages? Anything that just pops up there? The what? Judgment, her judgment, I think. Yeah. It helps when Sheldon has just read the text, doesn't it? So yeah, but a lot of times when I ask that question, though, I hear, well, Mark of the Beast, Sunday Law, the Pope. Occasionally I hear Jesus the Lamb, which, if just as you go through Revelation, Jesus is, or the Lamb is, the beast most talked about in Revelation. So when we don't talk about the beast of the Bible, the Lamb is the most important one. It's very important, as you talk about the three angels' message, to make sure that you have them in context. So just a broad stroke overview. Revelation 12 is about the devil and the dragon and about what he's up to. He's going after the saints, the remnant of Christ's seed. So Revelation 12 is what the devil is up to. Revelation 13 is how he's going to do it. He's going to use a beast out of the sea. He's going to use a beast out of the dry ground to accomplish this going after the saints that he intends to do. If you believe, as I do, that second beast coming up out of the earth represents the United States, then you can see this very relevant to our time. And then Revelation 14 is what you can do about it. I mean, isn't that important? What the devil's up to, how he's going to do it, but don't you want to know what you can do about it? And Revelation 14 is about that very thing, the response to these activities of the devil and how he's about it. An overarching theme you'll see as you go through several chapters is a call to worship. There are 8 different calls to worship. All 7 of the 8 are about worshiping the beast. There's only one call to worship that's a true call to worship, and it's found here in the first angel's message that we just read for Scripture. A call to worship God as the Creator. The three angels' message, and if you grew up in the church, this is so strongly ingrained, it really becomes a lens through which we see world events happening. And when all the things Stan was reading for us, the current events, we filter that through this lens that we have grown up with on understanding how these events unfold through history. And we're kind of curious where we're at in those steps that happen as we go through it. The three angels' message is also one of what we call the pillars of Adventism. Sister White's talking about how she's reviewing things and she's listing these main pillars, these 5 different Bible truths that she considers to be the main teaching. And the three angels' messages is one of those pillars. I believe that this message is extremely relevant for today. Now, there are times when the church may not be relevant, but the message is always relevant. So what we need to examine maybe is, in fact, how we present it. How is Adventism relevant to today's culture? In a culture, as Stan was reading again, those statistics, how around the world, society is becoming less and less and less favorable toward Christianity. Seventh Day Adventists being one part of that group in Christianity, how relevant is even Christianity to today's culture? George Barna, who does, it's all he does, is research on Christian issues, shows, in fact, the slipping of Christianity in today's society as we move forward. I believe it'll always be relevant. Here's a paragraph that I think says, the work for this time is represented by the first, second, and third angels flying in the midst of heaven. The first angel has his message. The second follows the first and bears his message, but the first is not dropped. It loses none of its force as the second is proclaimed, so also with the third. The first angel's message will never become unrelevant, clear to the end of time. So recapping again, Revelation 14, 6 and 7, I saw another angel flying in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach to those who dwell on the earth, to every nation, tribe, tongue, and people, saying with a loud voice, fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment has come. And worship, here's that true call to worship. Here, worship him who made the heaven and the earth, the sea, and the springs of water. Now don't miss this point. The primary message of the first angel is the everlasting gospel. Right behind it is another message just as important, as especially relative to our time, is that the time of his judgment has come. Again, back to Revelation 13, that beast that came up out of the earth around 1798 was being formed, right at the end of a Bible prophecy time. And then moving forward to 1844, when, as we study Daniel 8:14, we believe the hour of his judgment has come. This is extremely relevant to us. As we look at these three angels' message, we can see some categories, some frameworks almost in these three different messages. I first was presented with this idea. David Ashrick and Jeffrey Rosario gave a presentation at General Youth Conference in Seattle in 2012, and laid out these broad outlines. And the more I look at it, the more I'm right on with that. That yes, there are three anthems, so to speak, of these three angels. The first angel, is framed in the framework of creation. Give glory to him who created the heavens and the earth, the sea and the springs of water. The second angel is about truth. Babylon is fallen. Okay, and there's a message of truth. And truth is important. It's important to God. It should be important to you. And the third angel is about freedom. It's all about liberty of conscience. And the don't fall for the mark of the beast, etc., etc. So looking at the first angel today, we're going to focus on this creator. I believe it's no coincidence at all that in 1844, at the end of the 2300-day prophecy, is the same year a man named Charles Darwin sat down with his pen and put to paper a manuscript that would evolve by 1859 to be released as a book called The Origin of Species. It's right at this time. Before this, there was really no argument even about where things came from. In fact, for science, it was an easy out. When they came up to, in geology, they come up to a problem they didn't understand, they would just say, Noah's flood. Noah's flood. And it was an easy answer to these questions that they couldn't answer. Now all of a sudden, there's an attack on the creation idea. And the interesting thing about the theory of evolution is it hasn't stayed in biology. It's jumped over to cosmology and almost every other so-called science that you want to take a look at is the assumed basis that the theory of evolution is a fact. Creation stands against that. And this whole system is an attack on creation. Worship him who made the heaven and the earth, the sea and the springs of water. It's a call to worship God as creator. And when we frame our presentation of the first angel's message with creation as its background, as its theme, it makes it even more relevant to the people around us, especially the younger generation. And as we get older, it becomes harder and harder to remain relevant to the younger generation. So when you take a look at Revelation, yes, it's true that the book of Revelation, over half of the book of Revelation is drawn from the Old Testament. If not word for word, at least the theme here and the theme there. But word for word, it's nowhere stronger than right here in the first angel's message when it says to worship him who made heaven and the earth, the sea, and the springs of water. Where is that found in the Old Testament? It's found in Genesis, and it's found again in Exodus 20. Right there in the fourth commandment is to worship God because he's the creator. And we can start at the commandment, but we should, as you mentioned, go back to Genesis there for finding the origin of the creation story, of finding the origin of Sabbath, of finding why this first angel's message is rooted with this theme of creation. The Sabbath truth points to creation. Don't ever fall for the idea that this was some Jewish tradition. Sabbath is about creation. It's about, and God designed it that way. Now, Sabbath is under attack. Don't miss. In fact, have you got your smartphone with you? Everybody got I know it's hidden there somewhere. Pull up your phone, and this is one time the pastor wants you to look at your phone while you're in church, and go to your homepage wherever you've got Google there. And if you've got a question, we ask Mr. Google, right? So, Ian, if you talk to your phone, go ahead, feel free to do that. Here's what I want you to put in, to type in or speak in. What is the seventh day of the week? So type that in. I hear some answers coming in. So, what's the seventh day of the week, according to Mr. Google?
Saturday.
Is that what yours came up with? Yeah, Mr. Google says Sunday. And this International Standard ISO 8601, representation of dates and times, states that Sunday is the seventh and last day of the week. Now, the rest of the article is all about how Sunday is the first day of the week. But the first thing to pop up on your phone when you type in what is the seventh day of the week is Sunday. And there is a war going on. There's an attack going on, and we should be aware of it. It's part of the culture we live in. But from this overriding anthem, this theme of creation that the first angel's message is based in, are several tentacles of items that people are interested in our world today that tie back to creation. For instance, health. Do you think Seventh-day Adventists should have anything to say about health? Do we have a message anywhere? Have you ever heard of that? That Seventh-day Adventists may have something to say about health? Okay. Well, right here in the first angel's message, it says, give glory to God. Does that spark any texts that come to your mind about giving God glory with health? Therefore, glorify God how? In your body. Yeah, the fact there is a health. In fact, the world seems to be rediscovering that we are one indivisible whole. That what affects your social life affects your physical life, affects your spiritual life. And that we're all tied together. And now we've got even scientific studies that measure how fast your vitamin D drops when you get hit with a trauma in your life and things like that. Because even though it was over here, it affects other areas, that we are in fact one indivisible whole. And the call then to glorify God in your body is most clearly found back in the story of creation. We were created how? In God's image. And then he put man there in the garden in this perfect environment, and the diet and everything is there. Christianity is now discovering a message that Adventists have had for 100 years. Anybody ever heard the Daniel Plan? It's a diet book. It's a diet program. And it was, shall we say, discovered. Rick Warren in his Saddleback Church wrote this book. It's been a bestseller. You can go on their website, and thousands of people have now lost hundreds of thousands of pounds following the Daniel Plan that they found in the Bible about how you should eat and what you should not. There's another Christian rock star, Joel Osteen. Yeah, he's a rock star. He's got his own stadium. But you can go on YouTube and you type in Joel Osteen pork and watch him give a talk to his 30,000 crowd about why he and his family don't eat bacon anymore. About how the Bible says, that it's not good for you. And that even though we're not under those restrictions, God knew what he was doing then, and we should pay attention to some of this counsel. There's a best-selling book by Michael Pollan called In Defense of Food. It was on the New York Times bestseller, In Defense of Food. And the subtitle under that title says, Eat food, not too much, mostly plants. And it's like the world is discovering this. And so is it relevant today? Yes, and it's based in creation. This stream coming from creation of what's the best for you physically, what's the best for you mentally, what's the best for you spiritually, what's the best for you socially, what's the best for you sexually, is all there. And we're seeing now a huge resurgence in this idea of a Sabbath. Okay, not the Sabbath, but a Sabbath. That everyone would be better off if at least once a week they take a day as a Sabbath. We have a more complete message along that line, but people are clamoring for a healthier perspective. There's an online news organization called the Huffington Post, and they wrote this article about 11 health habits that you should do. Habit number 8 says, live like a Seventh Day Adventist. And it goes on to talk about the group around Loma Linda and how they live longer, etc. Health is one of the tentacles that comes out of the first angel's message to give God glory. And you can do that through health. Another area is sexuality. Sheldon was mentioning how wonderful it is to have an academy with some shelter for our young people against the onslaught of what's going on in the world. Sexuality is one of those areas that is permeating everything. And I can't even remember all the letters now. L, G, B, Q, and they keep going. And then now there's little symbols or asterisks after it. It's a mess, right? But even in a secular, worldly setting, magazines that do these sex surveys, and I don't recommend you take any, some of the questions are an abomination. But when they get through with all the surveys, they're finding that the people who are most sexually satisfied with their sex life are married monogamous, faithful. That those are the people who actually are the most sexually satisfied. Now, the reason that sex is one of the big places that Satan attacks is it belongs to God. Satan always attacks whatever belongs to God. We see him attacking the Sabbath. We see him attacking marriage. Those are the two things that came right out of Eden, back there in the creation story. And the reason that sexuality is under such attack and the reason that it's so powerful is because it's a God-given urge that Satan now asks you to fulfill in a way that's not God-approved. Perversions are so wrong because sex is so right, and trying to restore what belongs to God is relevant to our culture today, to our young people today, to the message they need. This temptation to fulfill a legitimate desire with an illegitimate means is nothing new. It's exactly what Satan hit Jesus with in the wilderness. I mean, if you haven't eaten for 40 days, is it a legitimate desire for you to be hungry? Yes. But then the temptation was to fulfill that desire with an illegitimate means, to step out of his humanity into his divinity and create his own food. And the same with the second temptation. The desire to honor God, to make God look good is fine, but to step away from faith into presumption is an illegitimate way to do that. The third temptation, Jesus came to this earth to redeem all the kingdoms. And here is all the kingdoms offered to him, but it's an illegitimate pathway to achieve that. Satan is good at that sort of thing. Another area that the first angel's message, rooted and grounded in creation, is relevant is human rights. You hear anything about human rights these days? George Floyd was last year, and the Black Lives Matter and sex trafficking, all this talk about human rights, equality and justice. One of the biggest in-your-face for human rights is we were created in the image of God. Does that make any of us above or below another one? No, it makes us all equal, right? And when Sabbath comes to you, does it come to the master but not to the slave? No, Sabbath comes to everyone equally. The clarion call for human rights is based here in creation and through the first angel's message. It's very relevant to our society today. How about animal rights? How many here love animals? And not because they're delicious. I mean, just you love animals. Okay. What does the Sabbath Commandment say? Does your horse have to keep working because it's Sabbath? No, he gets Sabbath off too. There's a call for animal rights, for treating God's creation with respect, based right there in the Sabbath Commandment. It's one of the strongest arguments for vegetarianism, is the Eden diet. You were created to love animals. God made you that way. How about environmentalism? Is that a current issue going on in the world today? And are we seeing Christians being put over on one side of the issue, whether you wanted to be there or not? And our Christians are afraid of the environmental movement because they see it being coerced, co-opted, and used for illegitimate means? Absolutely. But if we go back to the Genesis story, if we go back to that God put man in the garden and he gave him dominion over the earth, we get in trouble right there. You ask people, what does dominion mean? And the first word that I hear when I ask that question is dominate. And yet that's not what the Scripture's talking about, because if you keep reading, you go on down a little further and it says God put them in the garden to tend and keep it. See, your dominion is your domain. Your domain is your area of responsibility. That's your house is your domain. It's your area of responsibility. And God has put us on the earth and given us dominion, given us responsibility for it. Many people are astounded to learn, in fact, that environmentalism is something that Christians are concerned about, that we believe that we've been put here as stewards on the earth. If you want to read something that I just am so impressed with, it's a little lengthy, but it's the official statement of the Adventist Church on environmentalism. Well written by committee, you can kind of tell that, but well written, well spoken, and straight out of it. If you want to read probably the best article I found on this dilemma of environmentalism and being associated with it as Christians, Ty Gibson wrote a blog piece called "Teetering on the Edge" about this dilemma that we face. And I recommend that one to you as well. Another area, another tentacle of this story that comes down to us from the first angel's message, but rooted in creation, is consumerism. We're seeing a strong call now all around us toward a more simple life. Even the minimalist movement or the tiny house movement is all of a sudden a big deal as well. Consumerism is largely, well, here's one paragraph from the previous mentioned Seventh Day Adventist position on environmentalism. Paragraph right out of that says, "These problems are largely due to human selfishness and the egocentric pursuit of getting more and more through ever-increasing production, unlimited consumption, and the depletion of non-renewable resources." Consumerism is something that we have a relevant message on. What is the biggest business day of the week? Saturday. And what does the fourth commandment tell us to do? Rest and don't buy and sell, right? The Sabbath is an in-your-face, direct opposition to a worldly, selfish position on consumerism. And it says, just stop. Take a break. Relax. And it's a protest against that 24/7 mentality that's in the world around it. Just stop, slow down, appreciate what God has done for you. It's not all about getting more and more and more. Workaholics is the number one addiction that is approved in America. And yet people are killing themselves with that addiction as well. Secularism. Secularism is fairly new, only a couple hundred years really, that this mindset of secularism is there. But the first angel's message is a clarion call back to God, to worship God as creator. Here's one little paragraph from a book called The Great Controversy about what we could have had if we'd stayed faithful to what God gave us. It says this: "It was to keep this truth ever before the minds of men that God instituted the Sabbath in Eden." And follow this: "So long as the fact that He is our Creator continues to be a reason why we should worship Him, so long as the Sabbath will continue as its sign and memorial, had the Sabbath been universally kept, man's thoughts and affections would have been led to the Creator as the object of reverence and worship, and there would never have been an idolater, an atheist, or an infidel." Great Controversy, page 438. Wow. We have, in fact, been given three angels' message, and the first angel's message, this clarion call, is not just relevant, but all of a sudden today, it's popular. The question is, how relevant are we in presenting this to the people around us? First angel's message is rooted, grounded, and established in creation, in God being the creator, and it's the beginning of a very relevant cross-cultural message that we can share. We don't need to change the message. We just need to be more intentional about the way the message gets delivered. I invite you to explore and learn the three angels' messages and see how relevant and cutting edge God's message is for our time. Closing hymn, we're going to sing 383, a song about the Sabbath, O Day of Rest and Gladness.